Welcome to the Skaterade podcast. I'm Jasmine,
I'm Mac.
and we're here with our pal Olive. You want to do a little introduction,
y'all.
Mac?
Yeah, sure. So, actually, Olive, do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want to share with folks a little bit about yourself and what you do, what you're all about?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Olive. I'm happy to be here with y'all. I currently co-own Radical Wheels and started and operate for Skate Alliance. I have a long history also playing roller derby, both bank track and flat track, with teams in San Diego and Los Angeles. And I've worked at kind of a number of skate shops and a couple different skate brands kind of on the West Coast while I was out there. I still park skate a ton. That's kind of where my heart lies as far as skating goes now. But I grew up at the roller rink in the Midwest. So I've had a love and passion for skating for a really long time and come at it from a lot of different angles, I guess. But yeah, happy to be here and happy to chat with y'all.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. You're someone that, we've kind of been in community with one another, like just via the internet in some ways for years. And I've been really excited about the projects you've been working on. So I'm excited to sort of dive in a little bit deeper today and ask some questions, get to know you a little bit more. Thanks for being here.
So you got started skating at rinks, from what I understand. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest and there were still a decent number of roller rinks at the time, and everyone's favorite thing to do, particularly during like bad weather season, would be like hitting the roller rink. So it kind of started as like a like bad weather thing or a weekend thing, and just kind of fell in love with it. When the weather would be really bad, my friends and I used to like to make, like dance routines on our roller skates and stuff in the basement to pass the time as well. I think at some point it maybe became uncool later in high school or something to go to the roller rink, but like not really with my friends. We kept going. So it's always been a love and passion of mine.
Yeah, I saw in your bio that you used to practice
you know?
something called a break skate routine. What exactly is a break skate routine?
YouTube was like just emerging or like not, nearly at the capacity it is now. So I don't really recall where we would watch these videos, but there were, different pockets all through the Midwest of like different teams or crews that would put together like dance routines, and they would have different names or they'd have different themes and stuff, and they'd go to different rinks and like compete. And that was just big at the time. And so, that was our thing too. Like we had like the 3 or 4 of us in the basement. We were also like, we thought we were a crew and we would have different dances than the other folks. And I don't know, like it was just like a fun, super like friendly thing that we would all do. I think that maybe break skate was like probably the name of one of the teams that was in the area. And like, that's what we all just called it. We break skated like team break skate or whatever it was, but I'm not sure if that's like an official thing. Like, that might be a really legit thing somewhere that I don't know that much about. So, just being honest.
I'm just hearing basically that you're a dancer and a break dancer is what's coming through to me, essentially.
So after your dance routine days in the basement, what was the next era of your skate journey like?
From there, interestingly enough, my parents actually sent me to a Catholic school that had a roller rink in the gym, which was silly because nobody in my family was Catholic anyways. And really the way that I survived Catholic school was by roller skating in the gym on the weekend as well. So that was fun. I suppose that led into sort of like, I don't know, like enjoying the rink later through school, like, after the years where everyone just like has birthday parties or whatever there. I didn't actually skate a ton after like, I don't know, like growing up time, basically. Like I like left for college in Chicago for a bit. I skated like really minimally, like recreationally, but I kind of switched to biking for a long time in between. And it was kind of until starting to play roller derby that roller skating came back around into my life.
You worked at some bike shops and stuff too, right?
Yeah, when I was living in Chicago, I was working at a bike shop that I had an absolute blast at, and I'm still friends with a lot of those folks. And I always really loved like interacting with folks at the shop and helping them get what they needed to be able to ride. And just, like I just love riding bikes too. I like the freedom and the exploration of it and the hands-onness of like the parts and the fixing it and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's like still a love of mine, really. When I'm not skating, I'm still kind of biking.
You did mechanic work at bike shops?
Yeah, I ended up, I guess, mostly working in sales, but I think by being kind of a hands-on person just by nature, like we always had to have at least like basic skill, like being able to change flats or like those kind of things. And I just like to fix stuff. So like I was already like taking my bike apart and trying to put it back together, seeing what could fit on what. And so I've like built a lot of bikes up by like building them for friends. Really, also biking is where I got engaged in projects where you can like refurbish things and send them off to folks who maybe can't get them otherwise or who maybe don't have as great of access. Like the cycling world has a lot of programs where they fix up bikes and get them to folks at a cheaper price, or they send them off to different countries where they like rely on them for transportation. So to be honest, that all still really also inspires like the roller skating work that I do with like Skaters Without Borders and that kind of stuff, getting roller skates to folks who maybe don't have access as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I want to kind of keep, on sort of your skate journey, but I am curious about, I know something you have been involved with is Skaters Without Borders, and you also do some sort of work with like Queer Skate Alliance. So I'm curious to like, is there a crossover between those two things? Could you say any more about some of the commitment that you have to working with something like Skaters Without Borders or even like QSA?
Sure. Queer Skate Alliance like has many different facets, or I guess has really kind of like evolved over the years, to be honest, at this point. But one thing that's always been really important, like to me, with that project is just like getting skates to folks who can't get skates otherwise. Like that looks like different things in different places or to different people. Like skates can be expensive and some places don't have a skate shop nearby. Some folks have a skate shop nearby that like doesn't treat them so great. Like just this myriad of issues and lack of access to some of those things. And so it's always been really important to focus on things like having loaner gear accessible, things like not just having loaner gear, but also having gear that folks can take and use on their own, like on their own accord. And then also getting skates to folks without skate shops looks different here than it does internationally, which is kind of where a lot of the work with Skaters Without Borders comes in. They just expanded that branch. Skaters Without Borders started as Derby Without Borders, and they still operate, as kind of like a sister org or whatever you want to call it. But their main mission is to get skates to folks who don't have a skate shop nearby or who are maybe located somewhere internationally where like the cost of getting skates to them, is just like really, really high, especially right now. So we tag team on a lot of different things to either build up old skates that people would consider like trash, unfortunately, and get them to people, and they still work. Or sometimes that looks like getting donations from brands and sending stuff and raising some of the money to cover, the cost of getting stuff somewhere, things like that. So it's looked a little different over the years, and they obviously like do a ton of their own work too. But as far as the stuff that I do and with like Queer Skate Alliance, most of it has been for me, most of it's been the hands-on stuff. I get a lot of odds and ends and a lot
Mhm.
of plates and like stuff and have to figure out how to put it together. Like I build a lot of Franken skates.
I'd love to spend some more time talking about some of that stuff too, but I want to kind of rewind a little bit because you've kind of given folks a little bit of the rundown. You introed yourself and we talked a little bit about, as a kid, it sounds like you were just around skates quite a bit in sort of this like fun, self-expressive, like recreational capacity. But I kind of know you a little bit more from like the derby world. My understanding is you started with actually bank track derby. Can you, maybe share a little bit about how you got into derby, how you sort of transitioned into that space, especially given that you took a little bit of a break from skating for a little while. What got you into derby?
Sure. So when I left the Midwest and headed out west initially, I ended up in San Diego and I needed to like make friends, honestly. I needed to have like a good, healthy hobby where I made friends. And so I joined local roller derby there, which was then San Diego Derby Dolls, is now Derby United as they've dropped dolls, which I'm stoked on. That's a bank track team down there. Bank track is a little bit different than flat track roller derby. It's on an elevated track raised on either end, and the rules are just like slightly different. It's played like a little bit faster, and people get on and off the track like a little bit less. It's, yeah, played slightly different, but I did also go on to play flat track roller derby. both in San Diego and then later up in Los Angeles with Angel City, which was really fun.
Yeah, totally. I am curious, it sounds like Derby for you was really this way of sort of building community, which I know is also something that expressed as being important to you. It's something that you're kind of regularly involved in again, especially with like QSA. And what was it like for you to also like move cities and sort of, you know, kind of move that community around a little bit? What is it like to sort of get into skating in a new city for you? Because you also recently have kind of changed cities again in the last, what, year or two?
Yeah, once I get to looking back, I'm like, wow, I've moved, sure moved around a lot, which is kind of a trip. But no, I moving to San Diego and finding roller skating and revitalizing like the joy that I found with roller skating was really important and came at a really like honestly a really low point in my life. I needed friends. Like moving cities is hard. I think people underestimate the toll that moving can take on a person a lot, to be honest. And so, yeah, to completely uproot and go somewhere where I didn't really like know many folks or have much support was hard. I did find a lot of that in roller derby. I'm big on chosen family. Roller derby had a lot of that. I met, probably my first couple like close queer friends playing in San Diego that I still keep in close contact with and stuff. So it was really what I needed at the time as far as community and camaraderie. And I would definitely say that that's always something I've like kept with me because I know that it can be that for people and people can come to it at difficult times in their life. And so like holding space for people and maintaining that community aspect is like so vital to yeah, like most things that I've gone on to do, I guess, because it really like made the experience for me. And to be honest, it can also break the experience for people. It has for me a couple times and I've come back for it. But when people go to roller derby or roller skating and hit a wall and they're not included or whatever, and they don't find that family, it can also be equally like not good. So I also like to hold space for folks for that.
So you've played different types of roller derby from flat to bank track, but also it sounds like you've probably played in a few different leagues. What were those experiences like from city to city? Because it sounds like you've had some varied experiences. So I'm just curious, there did you feel you fit in most? Maybe not so much.
Gosh, I think my derby experiences in each city have been different. Playing bank track in San Diego is different because bank track is it's just a smaller like world of derby. I think there's maybe like 8 to 10 to 12 max bank track roller derby teams. So you're typically just like competing against like less people. The plus side to that is like you kind of know everybody, you like go to the tournament and it's like one big family for better or worse. And so that's kind of nice. And that was important at the time. I do think that moving into the world of flat track, playing like WFTDA, Derby, there's like thousands of teams, there's like international tournaments. Like just the entire scope of that is like much larger. And so that really opened up like opened up the family for better or worse. So those experiences were different. I I genuinely had, like ups and downs at both, or like I'm sure that every league has like its ups and downs and you find all kinds of people everywhere and like all those kinds of things. So I don't think anyone's got all of that figured out in one way. I don't currently play roller derby in Portland. I've had too many concussions to play competitive roller derby anymore, but a lot of those folks like are still like friends or we skate park together or whatever it is now. So I can't really speak to Portland roller derby, even though that is like where I'm located now.
Yeah, actually, for folks who are listening, you don't know this, but we are sort of re-recording because we had some issues. And so I know last time we actually talked quite a bit about like concussion stuff and kind of what it's like to sort of go through that. Can you speak to that at all? Can you share a little bit about kind of what your experience was? Especially, I'm kind of curious about like, how do you know maybe when it's time to take a break? Especially when I know like, skating is something that can be so important to one sort of sense of identity.
Yeah, concussions are hard because they truly affect everyone like so differently. And so I think the thing that became most important for me while healing through like multiple concussions really over the years was finding other people who had also had concussions. And that was nice in that we could like commiserate on that or kind of speak some of the same language. But even saying that we spoke some of the same language is hard because they just truly affect everyone so differently. So, like, I think that, it's like we grew an empathy for each other's situation because we know what that was like. But yeah, they're so different. I've had concussions, like, I had, one skating park, I've had one playing roller derby, I've had them on flat track, I've had them in bank track, like, there's no one helmet that doesn't give you them, like, there's no kind of skating where they're not a risk. That sort of thing is, like, important, I think, that folks assess when they're skating, but yeah, they're just hard because they affect everyone really different. For me, it looked like a lot of, like, visual issues, impairment, like, blurry lines. I still have kind of, like, sight issues sometimes, really bad migraines. It also affected me emotionally, just, like, high highs and low lows, and a lot of the symptoms went on for, I don't know, some went for weeks and were more severe and then went away, but there's stuff that lasted years, and there's stuff that I still know is increased now because I had concussions and things like that. I definitely had to learn to listen to my body more and to learn when to say no to skating sometimes, which, like you said, Mac, like, it is hard because, it becomes identity, yeah, but also, like, kind of an outlet. For me, it's a big time outlet, like, it helps me release a lot of just, like, stress and anxiety and make, like, any serotonin, and so, yeah, to not have that is hard, but I think that that is also important to remember when we interact with other skaters who have, like, had concussions or not. Like, I think that we could go a long way with maybe being more soft in the way that we, like, talk with folks who have had them and are more understanding and empathetic about the situation or the side effects that are occurring that, like, we might not know about or read about, because they're different for everyone. So when your concussion friend is like, "Hey, it's just really loud in here, like, it's kinda painful for me," like, you gotta listen to that, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, especially in like a lot of sports communities, it's just like, it's like someone breaks a leg or something, and it's so kind of like, well, yeah, of course you're going to take time off. But I sometimes feel like it's, concussions, especially historically, have just not been taken super seriously. And there can sort of be this culture in a lot of sports, but certainly I've kind of experienced it in derby, especially more competitive derby, of like, really, like, you need to get back as soon as you can. Or like, even for me, just I wanted to get back as soon as I could at certain points. And, I've had various concussions as well. And I definitely think some of that stuff affects me now. And I definitely like pushed myself to come back probably well before I should have at various points in my derby career. So it can be kind of tricky. It can be really tricky to also make that call for yourself when when you're kind of surrounded by that culture, and when there's just like not a lot of information out there. Like, I also don't feel like it hasn't been till very recent years that I've noticed people really starting to be like, okay, let's get really serious about the concussion and symptom conversation, especially in roller derby. I don't know if you've kind of noticed that too, or have been affected by that at all, but I'd be curious about that for sure.
Yeah, I do feel like I see more people talking about them, which is good because I do think that's, like, how we start to understand better and stuff. I definitely experienced, like, a push to go back and play. That's probably something that I admittedly did to myself a little bit, but also that was definitely, like, ingrained in the team structure and from the top down or, like, however you wanna word that because the notion was really kinda like, "Oh, you got one? Like, you got a concussion? Like, we've all had one," like, almost like a badge of honor. Like, of course you've gotten one, and then the expectation was definitely to, like, yeah, to get back to playing, or I set a tryout in sunglasses in a warehouse because I had to be there for attendance, and I couldn't skate. I couldn't even take my sunglasses off because of the visual, like, because the lights and stuff hurt so bad. But the expectation was, like, definitely to go back and play. I think that sports in general are starting to see, like, the toll that, TBIs in general, like, take, and those players, quite frankly, don't come back a lot of the time, which is a bummer, and also you see a whole lot of other, like, issues stem from them, so I'm glad that I'm starting to see folks talk about it more, and hopefully someone hears this and is like, "Oh, we should really talk about concussions more and traumatic brain injuries because 'cause they're real and they affect people differently."
Hmm.
It sounds almost to me like it was viewed as a short-term problem by people and it in fact has long-term consequences. So people are just expected to just keep going, and in turn, I'm sure that exacerbated things for you. And I wonder, what it's like for you now, having stepped away from competitive roller derby and kind of skating on your own terms. I think that I would imagine that that would be a rewarding process to kind of listen to your body a little bit more and sort of tune into your skating practice as something all your own. Would you say that's true? And what has your skating practice been like as of late?
Yeah, I would definitely say that that's true. I park skate a lot right now, and the friend that I go most frequently with, she's also had concussions in the past. And so she's kind of like learning to park skate. She's a little bit newer, and like we've both taken falls and stuff, and we communicate really like openly and honest and like right away with each other, like when we take a fall, like how we feel or how it feels with our head. And there's been falls that we've even taken, like that where we get up and we feel fine, and then when we're getting a snack later or something, we're like, man, I feel kind of shaken up, or just whatever it is, because it's different for people. Kind of what comes back. I think for us, it kind of looks like migraines sometimes, or different things like that. And so the ability to now park skate for me and to be able to kind of be the own judge of like when I need to rest or when I can go and when I can push has been really helpful. And then additionally, like having that conversation with other like peers in that space uh, has also been really helpful, because there's just kind of a better understanding. It's not this competitive, like, no, we've got to go, we've got to win a medal kind of push. It's like, no, we pack it in for today. We go get some water. Like just a very different environment. And I think near the beginning of that, you mentioned like, that it's kind of seen as like a temporary thing or like a short term thing. And I do think that's also really spot on. And maybe for some people they are, or I don't know, I've had multiple ones now. So maybe like they get worse later, or something. I don't know. But generally speaking, like, yeah, people treat it like it's I don't know, a broken arm or something. And you just go back when it's done. And that is probably problematic thinking, because some people have a terrible arm break and nobody understands and they don't want to go back either. So I think we should probably just like touch base with folks about those things, and not expect people to push in that sport more often. Not everyone wants to leave it for park skating, but it is also really nice to just be able to skate for joy and skate at like my own capacity when I want. So
That is a really good point about injury in general, because as of late, I feel like I'm seeing more and more skaters skating with a cast or skating with a brace. And I'm like, are you okay? Like, I know bodily autonomy is important, but at the same time, I hope that these people are taking time to heal.
yeah, in roller derby, there was a really popular saying at the time that was destroy your body to save your soul. And I think about that from time to time, and I adhered to that at one point, or I thought that was something I wanted, and like that resonated with me at one point. But in hindsight, that really doesn't fit, or at least it really doesn't fit for how I feel like I need to choose to live my life now, which involves healing and rest and stuff. So I think that unfortunately, like there is a real like a lot of folks still want to like hustle and push. And I think even in park skating, there's this like skate or die kind of thrasher mentality where like it's, also almost seen as a badge of honor to be like falling apart and still skating, like shred till you're dead kind of thing. And like, again, like maybe for some folks, but I just needed to heal at some point. And I see a lot of other folks who need healing too. So I feel for folks who are in pain and are pushing through like to attain that.
Yeah. I feel like the empathy and the care really come across with you, talking to you these past few times, and just reading over your posts and, doing research on you for the podcast. And what really comes across about you is that you are very radically positive and your approach is inclusive and accessible and digestible. You're not saccharine at all. And in fact, you're quite refreshing. Did you cultivate this voice or did it come naturally to you?
Well, I was so honored when I saw that one of the questions, because I just think that's like written so like sweetly. I'm so honored that that's how y'all see me. And I've been thinking about this a lot since like the last time we spoke too, that I think it would be really easy for me to sit here and be like, "Oh yeah, and then I did this and then it led into this and it worked out perfect." And I was planning this all along, and like this has always been who I am. And like parts of that, like you said, like the empathy or the caring about community like that, like, yeah, I've always cared about that really, really deeply. But a lot of the rest of this has been like so messy and so like unknown and like painful at times, like physically with concussion stuff, but also like emotionally. And it's taken a lot of like carving my own space, I think, sometimes. And I think what comes from that is probably an increased empathy for like for definitely other people who are like fighting for their space or carving out their own space, and other folks who are still unheard, and other folks who still see things like go on beyond behind the scenes that nobody talks about, or that people, like think are okay and let slide past and stuff. And so, like, it's honestly just coming from lived experience and from trying to like navigate the murkiness of like dealing with all of it, because there's like so many things that need to be, fixed like
Yeah.
structurally and everywhere. But like they are very permeated within the roller skate community, like as they are with a lot of other communities and stuff. So yeah, like I'm so glad that y'all think it comes out like sounding like good and from the heart, because it is from the heart, but man, it's messy on this end a lot of the time. It's just the honest truth. Like,
That's just part of it sometimes, right?
To me, I would always, always, always see a messy, authentic person than someone who's like kind of curating a certain voice and kind of cutting those parts of themselves out. Because I think, how can we actually really genuinely build community if we're operating from a place of like hiding parts of ourselves, whether that's from shame or perfectionism or I don't know, whatever it is, like I just would always rather see that. I was literally just talking to someone actually, and this is like a problematic save moment. But I was just talking to someone about that basketball documentary with Michael Jordan and like Dennis Rodman and what's his face. And I was like, look, I love Dennis Rodman. Okay. Like he's like kind of awful in a lot of ways, but also like he puts it out there, whereas like, I'm just like, you know what? Like I would rather watch like see that or like engage with that on some level than someone who's just like going to kind of, I don't know, like pretend that they're perfect or yeah, I don't know, like curate a very specific voice. And sometimes it's appropriate to do that, I think. But at the same time, like again, when it comes to like community organizing, when it comes to community involvement, when it comes to like building genuine relationships with people, mess is a part of that. Like we have to be okay with ourselves being messy and other people being messy because like accountability can step in for that, right? Like, we can't be accountable when we're busy pretending that we're perfect. Like that we don't even admit that we're wrong half the time. So I don't know. I'm here for the mess. All I'm saying.
It's a really good point.
Dennis Rodman or not.
a
The mess.
100%.
Rodman or
Yes,
die.
100% on Team Dennis Rodman. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Problematic, I know,
No,
but
I
look,
super
putting it out
agree.
there.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think that like I think social media pushes folks to curate so hard that like so many folks get maybe caught up in that and like don't even mean to, but it feels like almost the nature of it sometimes. And the more that I embrace just like the mess, honestly, and being like the odd guy out, as I've said sometimes or whatever, the more like it's just, I don't know. Yeah. Like the more it just feels right, or it's authentic, or it actually connects with community, or it works out, or like whatever you want to call that. But I guess I grew up in a pretty like, I'll call it fiery household. And so I definitely learned the importance sometimes of like I'm good at like choosing my battles maybe, or like a lot of my friends are honestly real hot-headed, and like tend to respond to things really like quick and stuff. And so I do tend to kind of like sit with something and like contemplate it and think about how I really want to address something. And I'm proud if that comes through sometimes, but I am definitely trying to shed my own like perfectionism in that or whatever, because like you said, Max, like you just can't, you cannot do community work if you're not willing to arrive like messy and also unfigured out and imperfect and all of that sometimes. Like it's just not, it just doesn't, it's not the same. It's just it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. How do you find new ways to encourage connection, especially when like something like social capital or like followers or sponsorships can be such a strong force of influence, in the field. How do you kind of keep being authentic with the way that you engage despite some of those pressures?
Sure. Like we were just saying, like constantly a learning process. Like I have an answer to it now, but it's by no means like the answer or anything. I feel like I I feel like I genuinely try to avoid a lot of things that are just like, I don't know, like maybe large or flashy or over branded or just like super large brands or things like that in an effort to just kind of stay a little bit more engaged with like actual community. Like there are some things out there that are really rad and are probably doing really good work. And I just always felt like getting caught up in some of those things personally would make me lose like the more like DIY, like really community ingrained like part of it that was so important to me. So like I don't know, something for example, like Vans does a lot of really cool collabs with some really rad black skaters, queer skaters, trans skaters. They like donate to certain groups and stuff. Like they're rad. But that's something that, like if it came across, I'd probably be like, no, like that's not what it's always been about. And so there's honestly been like there's some areas where I feel like I need to like grow or learn with that. Like maybe it's not all bad, but the most honest answer as to how I've tried to keep really like kind of community rooted is by like just really like not it's like not allowing myself to get like starry-eyed about those things. Because I think unfortunately, while a lot of things like that can have good intentions and stuff, a lot of them are still structured the same and they still don't do a lot of the things that I think like brands can do once they start to make, money back or whatever. So I wish more folks in the skating community in general sometimes like steered away from some of the like flashy starhead type stuff because it just doesn't it's like a flash in the pan or whatever that saying is. Like just not typically stuff that's like as rooted in community or even something that stays around as long. And I think a lot of the skating community right now is seeing that with the way that like there was like a pandemic boom to some and now it's like tapering off or going away or lessening the boom or plateauing or again like whatever we want to call it, but like it's changing again. And so we're kind of like evolving into another phase of that almost. Honestly, I grew up in the last generation that didn't have a phone all the time, like I remember regular scenes and like it's like I love the things that my phone can bring me, but I don't want to be on it all the time. I do not want to be an influencer. Like certain things like that just don't appeal to me. Again, probably just because of like either my age or like how I grew up and stuff. Like there's parts of that that I'm like, oh, I don't ever want to do that. Like, you know.
Yeah. So if you feel comfortable talking about this, kind of backing up a little bit in terms of the skating boom, I know that recently you had been working for a skate shop and doing buying for them. But I know that recently you got let go from that position. And I would imagine that's because skating sales are starting to dip a little bit.
Yeah, that is probably true.
I don't know how
I
much you want to
think
talk about it.
also
So I
that
left it kind of
somewhere
big. Sorry.
yeah, no, that's okay. I feel super comfortable with y'all, but generally speaking, I think that when skating boomed, a lot of people did exactly the thing that we were just talking about. Like they got really starry-eyed about things. They saw it taken off. They dreamed that it was going to continue to take off forever. And so that included, investing a lot of time and extra money and hiring a lot of extra people. And a lot of shops got another shop. And then people got additional warehouses and everyone like tripled their orders in size. And I think, like, I've never studied business or anything like that, but I think that generally speaking, like in the past, or maybe even knowing what I know from like bike stuff or whatever, like nothing grows like that forever, like things always eventually plateau or taper off. And so I'll be honest, like I saw it coming for a long time, and I know a lot of other people are kind of sharing that sentiment. So I don't think anyone is surprised that the boom of the pandemic or roller skating or whatever is like tapering off. I think that being said, I still think there's a ton of new roller skaters like that exist now. So I don't think they all like went away or I don't think they all sold their skates, even though roller skates were apparently one of the most regretted purchases of the quarantine or whatever. I guess I also would say that I don't know. The honest truth is a lot of people just brought people into their shop that they can't afford to keep. And honestly, some people warned me that that was going to happen. And I thought maybe, no, it won't happen to me. And it did. So I do wish that people prioritized like differently. I think that when we tell people we want you in our shop, we want to keep you around forever. When people say trans skaters are important, to keep in the industry, these kind of different things, and then they don't keep us around or keep us employed or those kinds of things, I think those are like your actions not meeting your words, know.
Yeah.
Um, but I've also like I've left a lot of the skating jobs in the industry. I've left all of them like cordially. That has also been the case with this job, and I like wish everyone the best. But I honestly also think I just see things really differently than those people. So I think that like Queer Skate Alliance and Radical Wheels will continue to grow, just like a lot of other like small, more like mutually aid minded, more like inclusive minded brands will continue to grow bigger, like I'm here for that anyways. So
Yeah. I feel like that's
an
a
evolution, maybe. I don't know.
yeah.
Now I'm
That's
trying to stay PC. Like, yeah.
no, but it's a really apt observation for, you know, any industry that's selling any products. Feel like it's important to be inclusive in this day and age. I feel like a lot of consumers are waking up to that kind of thing. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, and I think the thing I see going on, I mean, probably in a like you said, in like plenty of industries or whatever, but in roller skating is like definitely that thing where people actions aren't maybe meeting their words. Like a lot of people like paid lip service to a lot of marginalized groups in like 2020 and said they were going to make a lot of changes or said a lot of things were really important to them in the last few years that still just really isn't matched in their practices as well. And so, that is still a thing that like the roller skating industry and community needs to address, like a lot of others do, like you said. But there are a real number of like skater owned and operated things where people can actually like structure things different or make a difference. And so if you say you believe in that, then like do it. Like then literally just structure it differently, like
Yeah, it's so tough because I mean, there's a whole thing we can get to the weeds with, and have a whole other episode dedicated to it. But it's like, I sometimes think that people's imaginations under capitalism and white supremacy are like so limited that it's like, okay, here's the structure, and then this is the structure that we follow, and there are like all these pitfalls that I see businesses fall into, like as they grow, that like literally are exploitative practices. And it's like because that's how businesses are structured under capitalism. So it's like you're so right, right? Like we should be able to just like build the new thing. But unfortunately, like I just don't always see that happening as things expand. And it's in part because of the lack of, I think, individual accountability. And it's also in part because of like the structures that we live under. And so it's so tricky. And I think that's part of why I feel so like excited about a lot of the stuff that you're doing is because I do see a lot of the ways that you are trying to be like sort of reimagine what's possible, right? And I think you hold a lot of that energy of like, okay, there is something else that we can move towards and strive towards. And I feel really similarly about that myself in terms of both like community building, DIY, and my history in DIY has been a huge, huge, huge part of that. Not to say DIY communities don't have their own problems sometimes,
Hmm.
but that's I don't know. It's tricky, right? Like it's a systemic thing and an interpersonal thing and a personal thing. And I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about it. But I appreciate the conversation nonetheless, because I think we all should be talking about it, thinking about it. And like you're saying, like if you want to do the thing, just do the thing. You might, I think unfortunately under the structure of capitalism, like you might not make the most money in the world, but like what's most important? Like is it scaling a business, quote unquote, so that you become this like CEO that makes a bunch of money? Or is it like building community sustainably and making sure everyone can eat, making sure that everyone has enough, making sure that, resources are distributed in a way that's like equitable. I think those are all things that people should be thinking about. And I feel like that's, a big part of kind of what you're speaking to.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that the notion that like there's still no ethical consumption under capitalism like is still very, real or whatever. And I know that was something that you and I talked about at one point because we mentioned that in a post about the joys and about radical joy and about, how really the answer to that isn't buying our wheels either, like, that kind of thing. But I think there's some real, there's some like real obvious things I still see going on in the skate community that I still think like we probably need to get better about. Like, I think it's easy to say there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, so some of these like companies are big or they're just going to need to do what they do for business or whatever. But I think like when we see some of them like directly, copying things that are run by smaller brands or that are run by black and brown and BIPOC folks or queer and trans folks, and then like slapping their label on it and calling them a day. And when we see them do things like time and time again, so it's not like, whoops, that happened once. It was coincidental. Maybe these, things were just alike. It's like, no, this is like structural, like you said. I do really wish that folks thought about that more when they make decisions to like, even just to like share things or to tag things or to like, put that shirt on and skate or whatever it is. Then like the, it sounds silly and like social media is kind of an eye roll, but it also goes a really long way to even hold a line on certain things like that. Be like, no, I won't do that. Like like I'm only skating shirts from like brands that give a shit or whatever, because there's so many of those and all of them have sliding scale pricing, or you can sign up to get them for free, or like different things like that. Like they're even more accessible. And I think that the more that folks shift to that and support things like Queer Skate Alliance and Radical Wheels, but also like Two Tia's Skate and Bout Betty's and Gender Shredder and like a lot of other ones out there. I could go, like you said, that could be its own episode, honestly. Everyone doing that kind of stuff makes me so excited. But there's some like real hard lines that we can start to draw here on like, no, I don't support that anymore because I'd rather support this because like these people give a shit, And so I do kind of wish sometimes that maybe we like, and I'm not saying you're using it as an excuse, but that maybe in general we all didn't use that as like an excuse, but found other ways to find brands that are at least making it sustainable, like you said, or who maybe aren't like, like raking in tons of money, but can at least get by and can give people wheels back and can do all these things to make skating more accessible to people. Those things go a
Yeah.
really long way. So not to
Well,
ramble, but yeah.
Yeah. So clearly the bottom line is that folks need to stop talking about it and be about it. And you have put your money where your mouth is. How did Radical Wheels come to be?
Radical Wheels is co-owned by me and my good friend Seppi, who skated as Neon, so mostly I call her Neon. She had started BIPOC Who Skate. That was, I think, about 4 years ago now. That was about the time I had also started Queer Skate Alliance. So we worked in real close solidarity together at the time. Just like we just kind of had similar missions within our own like marginalized communities. So we would just like share ideas all the time or be like a safe space to like share problems or whatever it was, like we just built community with each other. And really that's about when we met May with Skaters Without Borders as well and all started working together. But um anyways, Neon and I just started to meet through the work we'd done through QSA and through BIPOC Who Skate. Neon was living in Madison at the time, and I was living in LA. Now Neon lives in Michigan, and I'm in Portland, so we've both moved. We have only ever gotten to hang out together a couple times. We run the business like entirely from like two different places together, but we're also like we're family. Like there's no doubt about that. Like we love each other, and Radical is like our like sweet like baby, and we're just like-minded in all the same things when it comes to at least like community and giving back and mutual aid being important and a lot of those things like on a personal and political level. So Radical Wheels was born. I think it was also born out of a desire for exactly what we were just kind of talking about, like for a brand that actually was accountable and gave a shit, and like we have grown, like we've learned different things, we've evolved too. It's a constant process, but there is always something, if you're engaged with the community, there's always something you can be doing better at. So that's looked like all kinds of different things to her and I over the years now. But this is also just kind of a fun fact, I guess. But we actually launched Radical Wheels, and really then like the pandemic hit. So we went a whole year without wheels. We sold hats and like got people excited about it at skate shops and stuff. But we also, I think, kind of feel like if we can get through that, we can like survive a lot of things. So we're really excited with the future of Radical Wheels.
look, listen, waiting for that year was excruciating. I just have to say, from an outsider's perspective, I was like, okay, but when are they coming? I was so excited. I can only imagine from your end
God, you're telling
how
me.
difficult that was.
It was so hard, and, like, it honestly like, we had to really, like, keep each other's, like, hopes and spirits alive a couple times in there, and it was a hard year for a lot of reasons, no doubt, but yeah, like, it was a challenge for sure. Think also, like, Neon and I both like to be really planned out. Like, Neon and I are the kind of people where if we're setting up a booth, like, the next day, like, we set it up in our bedroom the night before to, like, make sure we have everything ready. So, like, we would have never launched and done a countdown and all these things ever, and then had to be like, "No, just kidding." Like, speaking of things that are messy, right, or, like, against the perfectionist, like, dream, maybe, like, that would have so never, been how we wanted that to go down, so
I actually heard maybe from you or through the grapevine that y'all also had like an issue with like a batch of wheels at some point or something. Like, I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking to that, but wasn't there like some issue with one of the first batches or like something with production at one point too?
No, we were fortunate in that once everything was done, like, it all arrived good and we haven't had, I don't know, we've had maybe like one or two wheel warranties even. So like quality wise, things have been really great. And that's been really exciting too. But some of the prototypes in the very beginning were a little funny. Like Neon has really done some different things with the art and it really pops. It sits kind of in the inlay of the wheel so that it doesn't rub off as long, like as quickly for folks so that they have their wheel art a little longer. But it definitely took a little like work back and forth with the factory to be like, oh no, like this like they'd be like, this is the art, it looks good. And we would be like, that's not even the art. Like, and it doesn't look good. Like there were just some like like funny back and forths. But we got it sorted out and luckily like everything after that has been great. So
Oh, that's great. I must have just been lost in
there's
the
blems, you know.
skate gossip. What is it called? Telephone. I can't remember who told me, but someone was like, "Oh, they're having all these issues." Oh shit. Okay.
N no, gosh, like, I wanna know, like, I hope if someone hears this and there's an issue, like, find our email immediately for, like, contact me because I wanna know, but no,
100%.
no
I'm glad.
issues.
I'm so glad to hear
Um,
that.
The rumor mill.
I know. Really. Again, like I think it was just like I don't even know. It was like an offhand mention. I just don't even remember who told me. So it's fairly inconsequential. Sorry for the
I
alarm,
was sending you
everyone.
pictures of the prototypes. No, I was gonna say, I was sending you pictures of prototypes when I was cleaning through what I call, like, the museum of wheels that I,
Yeah.
like, keep. And so I do think I was sending you pictures of the early stuff that they the art that they did, being like, "Well, this is right," and, like, showing you the now and being like, no, like, this art is, like, half off the wheel," or, like, just, like, wild stuff, but
Funny. You know, speaking to business and kind of where our conversation just came from too, in terms of like, trying to really support community, trying to really make sure that things are accessible. And some of what you said earlier around, I'm not really trying to be an influencer necessarily. I am curious when you think about having a skate business like Radical Wheels, what is success for you? How do you look at that? How do you kind of define that?
I I definitely don't like, I wouldn't speak for Neon, of course, but for me, it looks like Radical Wheels having a lot of the same presence that the other large skate brands have that folks recognize, only doing it in a way that is sustainable and that gives back to community. Like we have grown small and sustainably, and even though skating is like tapering off or the boom is over or whatever, like we were talking about, like we're still like consistent and doing well, and we're starting to sponsor like park competitions and things. I always get really excited when I see a Radical Wheels banner like hanging at a skate park for a competition. I think like 16-year-old Olive would have thought that was very rad and very cool. So even small things like that like still bring me a lot of joy. I think for Queer Skate Alliance and for Radical Wheels, I've always thought that success would maybe be like being in every skate shop out there that it like that gives a shit or that is like remotely ethical, right? So that like other queer people or other trans kids or other marginalized people can like find those brands or find those people or like know that something's going to give back to them if they make that purchase or like as a queer kid in the Midwest, like going into a skate shop and being able to buy like a trans skater shirt or something would have just been like unheard of. So giving kids like an opportunity to do that and stuff is something that is like hits home to me. But of course, like you said, always keeping in mind that whole like, but what would be too big kind of thing too. And I talk about this with my partner around the house all the time, like just randomly. I'll be like, if Zoomies ever told me blah blah blah, I'd be like, no. And then I'm like, well, maybe Zoomies isn't that. Like maybe I should Google who on Zoomies, or like I don't know, like tons tons of learning and growing to do on my end too, of course, in that regard. But like, yeah, for me it looks something like that, like I get excited to see like the sticker anywhere or like you know uh, any of it is cool because we exist and because I think generally speaking there's not another skate wheel company that I can think of that's run by like a trans person and an Iranian skater, like
Mhm.
so whatever however big we grow, like that is new, like that, that is
Mhm.
success. Kind of, we exist, we're surviving.
Yeah. So, what has been the focus of the mutual aid work that Radical Wheels has done?
So with every Radical Wheels purchase, either through the website or like when we stock a skate shop, like through the dealer orders and stuff, a percentage of those orders goes to a different organization. We rotate that organization every 6 months. And that is one way that we just like give back to different mutual aid groups in general. It was Skate Palestine one year, folks getting skateboards to Palestine. We also helped raise some funds for Brown Boy Fam in Chicago. And right now it is Skaters Without Borders. We're working to get some skates sent off to Bali for some folks there who skate park, and then also to Costa Rica for a derby group that just like doesn't have the stuff they need in the area. So that is one way. The other way is that Radical Wheels also has a pay it forward program. So at any point, anyone can go on our website. There's just a Google Doc that people can fill out. It doesn't ask any like invasive financial questions or anything like that, but they can sign up to receive a set of free wheels at no cost. They can choose which of our wheels they want, and we ship them out like monthly or so. We ship out a few sets every month. So to fund that, we actually did a coffee collab with Just Coffee Co-op in Madison because that's where Neon was living at the time. And yeah, that's just a way that folks can honestly sign up to get wheels if they couldn't get them otherwise. It's also a way where if folks want to help someone else get wheels, they can buy coffee or they can just donate to that program and help someone else get wheels who maybe couldn't afford a set. Because like wheels are like almost $100, give or take. I think a lot of people don't realize that or don't think about that, and
Yeah.
so it's expensive and it's hard for folks to get stuff. And even like some people ask me like, oh well, I have derby wheels, or like that person has derby wheels, they don't need to sign up for wheels. And I'm like, well, but we have park wheels, like, but if you have one set and you want to try something else, it's still like another $100. I'm like, we're not here to like judge or gatekeep on that either. Like if folks need wheels, they need wheels. So those are two of the main ways that we're engaged in giving back or in mutual aid. And then generally speaking, like everything that we do or that we make, we try to make with someone who kind of is engaged in that or gives back in some way too. So I don't want to ramble, but in Portland here, we print with New Avenues Inc., which helps get like kids jobs who have otherwise been kicked out of school or who otherwise would be like incarcerated youth. So with the printing that we choose and stuff, we're always really like aware of some of those things as well.
That's really, powerful. I mean, you just listed a whole long list of ways,
Yeah.
like point blank, like great examples for other people trying to do something similar, right? Like all these different ways where you can plug in different avenues you can find to like redistribute resources, make things more accessible. Again, even down to who you choose for printing, the other businesses that you choose to do business with and engage with. Yeah, as I'm hearing a very sort of like holistic approach to how y'all want to kind of run this, and one that is absolutely very, very community based.
Olive, let's talk about joy. On
Yay.
social, you talk a lot about the radical act of seeking joy and increasing access to joy for others through skating. How does joy liberate us?
Joy is a radical act. Like rest is a radical act. And like I think in a society that pushes us to like go 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 and like be okay and suck it all in and like keep your chin up and don't feel your emotions and whatever that looks like sometimes, I think that really just taking a moment to stop the cycle and to like engage in something that you want to do just because you want to do it, just because it brings you joy and for like no other reason is really important. For me, I admittedly my hobbies tend to become work, or, they tend to become something I want to like get really good at really fast or something. And so joy for me a lot of the time looks like kind of stepping out of that and being like, what's just like what makes me feel like a little kid about this? Like I talk a lot about like 16-year-old Olive or whatever, like kid me and like what would have brought them joy, because typically I find that's what brings me the most joy now. But yeah, it's just, like things are tough. The simulation is hard and sucks sometimes, and the planet's melting. And I think that if you're aware and empathetic, it's just a lot sometimes, and it's hard. And some days are hard to like get up and like endure it all. So I think that finding those small moments and sharing them with each other also, so that like maybe if you're having a hard time finding it that day, your buddy helps remind you kind of thing, just can go a really long way. And it must have, because those joy posts like resonate with a lot of folks, and then became like, the wheel with radical to the joys, because joy is something that Neon and I talk about a lot, and really like making sure that in the work that we do, or in the unpacking of all the really difficult things that there is still joy to be had, because it makes everything feel better
Yeah.
for like a minute sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
so easy, I think, in today's world too, to just grow up having just like trauma, vicarious trauma. It's so easy to kind of become sort of like hardened, or sort of be living in these like nervous system states where everything just kind of feels like a threat, or feels scary, or feels bad. And like, especially with all of the like impending threats that we have, like you mentioned, sort of global climate change piece, and like just, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot I could say about it all, but it does seem like being able to access joy, whether in community or individually, is like this real way of pushing back, being like, yes, like things are really hard. Yes, there's a lot to be scared of. There's a lot to be afraid of. And like, especially for marginalized people, like, what is life without trying to find joy in some of those moments? Like, I don't know. It's definitely was something that's been very transformative for me in the last year or two, as I've been sort of embarking in my own like little dance journey, and like my movement has changed because of injury and stuff too. And when everything else feels super shitty and there's all these things outside of us we don't have control over, being able to choose like a few things every day, or one thing every day, or being able to access even like a very small moment of joy can sometimes be really, really, really important and really, really powerful. So yeah, it definitely resonates.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that sentiment in my own way. Just kind of stepping away from, I previously worked in fashion and I've moved into working in skating. And it's just, for me, it's been, a less judgmental atmosphere, one that focuses on something much more physical. And I think skating itself just brings so much joy. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's real. I think another thing that kind of comes to mind is like, I think that a lot of folks that I knew who skated before the quarantine era of the pandemic are kind of reassessing sometimes like the way they skate now and stuff. And so I think for a lot of folks, like it was like trauma bonding can be really therapeutic and healing and helpful sometimes too. There's no doubt about that. And I think that can be really like therapeutic for me and some of my queer peers sometimes. But I think we also started to have pretty honest conversations sometimes that were like, "Oh, but we have to like we can't just sit around and talk about how hard things are all the time, or like it's just too much." And so even in like groups of friends and stuff that I have here and that I'm making in Portland, like the way that we kind of choose to interact now, or the way that we choose to spend our time, looks a little bit more like joy than it does maybe like other things that were maybe like bringing us down more than bringing us up. So now it's like, let's take our skateboards to the tennis courts and get popsicles and like, like I don't know, joy stuff I would have done as a
Yeah.
kid. And I'm really happy that like the experience in the shop is doing that for you, or that like working in skating is doing that. I don't know what you're up to, but I'm glad that that's also bringing you joy. I do know that skating to bring a lot of people joy through the different areas of the pandemic that we're living through. And so that makes me really happy to see. And I hope that folks, continue to find that as an outlet of joy.
Yeah. And speaking of Joy being an especially hard-earned resource for marginalized folks and marginalized skaters in this particular instance. Do you feel there has been a significant change in representation of marginalized skaters in the skating industry as of late? And what are ways we can work to take up more space and resist tokenization?
My friend Caitlin, who runs Jump Club, which is also an excellent like inclusion based brand and skate group, like stated this once perfectly. And so I'm gonna like quote her because I haven't thought of a way to say it better myself yet. But she said to me once that what she thought happened was that, this boom happened and we got more skaters. So we got more marginalized skaters too. Like that included getting more queer skaters and whatnot, but also that didn't necessarily mean that everyone like did the work or that grew. So I think like how this reflected was a lot of brands, they added folks to the team, and a lot of those team spots like have better representation than maybe they once did in the past, and that is true. In some cases that's not true at all. That's like step one. And like step two is like in some cases that's the case, but it was like they added one person to the team, and that has kind of been all the change that we've seen. And so like sometimes I think that leaves folks feeling like that's tokenization. Other times I think that leaves folks at the very least feeling like your actions just aren't really meeting your words again. Like if you support trans skaters and there's all these trans skaters, like how does your whole team have one white trans skater, or whatever it is, like these kind of things. And so I think that we see more skaters. I think we see a lot of younger skaters, and I think that like younger people in general, in my opinion, seem to be coming around to having generally more inclusive skate meetups and stuff in general. It's definitely different than like the roller derby vibe in the early days for me. And so that is good progress to see. There's a lot of really rad, smaller skater owned and operated brands that are run by queer and BIPOC folks. And so like again, always like uplifting and nodding to all of those because those definitely are on the rise. But I think a lot of the big brands have so much work to do, and I think they know it. Like, I think a lot of them barely scratch the surface, honestly.
That's real.
Yeah. I would say too, like I'm curious, this kind of makes me think of like QSA too, in terms of just like representation and joy, because I think so much about like for me following QSA over the years and just seeing queer folks and trans folks being represented in such a vast array of ways, whether it's like derby folks or park skaters, like whatever, however you're sort of sharing people's stories. QSA has sort of almost become this like documentary page of like documenting just like living, breathing, skating, queer and trans people. Can you maybe share a little bit about QSA? Because we've dropped the name a couple of times tonight, but haven't really gotten into it. Maybe a little bit about how it started, what the impetus was for you, what's important to you about it.
Sure. Yeah, it's really wild, honestly, to think about it now because it's 4 years old, and so it's really like it's evolved into different things than I think I expected, or like the way that it feels like it needs to do things now is different, maybe than how it started, but maybe not at all. I don't know. Anyways, I started Queer Skate Alliance about 4 years ago. I speaking felt like there was a lack of representation for queer skaters, at least in the way that like I kind of wanted to see in the community at the time. I think that was like the queer representation that you would see through roller derby and whatnot and roller skating was just it's just really like one or two types of folks. Like it wasn't reflecting the diversity that I was like not only like living and existing, but seeing and interacting with in the skating community. And so I started Queer Skate Alliance. The first thing that really became a big project was that the headlining queer game at RollerCon every year used to be called Vagine Regime, and it was always
Mm,
God, what was it? The cocksuckers versus the
yep.
I literally don't even remember, which is like great because evolution. And I'm sorry to everyone who like really like that game is everything for. But generally speaking, the games and the names were really bioessentialist. There was a lot of genitalia running around. Trans people weren't really included or represented in it very well at all. There had been trans folks who'd spoken out about that and who had even like protested it in certain ways and situations, and nobody was listening. And it just really felt like like there needed to be space for like like in hindsight for trans skaters too, I just didn't maybe know that at the time as much. Like I didn't know that that would end up as much at the forefront. But I don't know, we changed the Vagine regime game, like, that went away, and we had a Queer Skate Alliance game, and it was, I think, the first time that it was, like, mixed level, mixed gender, mixed whatever, like, just a bunch of queer peers representing all these different backgrounds. Everyone just had a blast, and it was this, like, supportive community vibe that, like, you don't always feel when you're in a really, really hyper competitive situation, and the goal is, like, just to compete, and just to win. We kinda came back from that, like, motivated to have more skating events that felt that way, I think, that felt more community driven. And it's interesting to think about now because honestly, now they happen all the time. Like, now it's so easy to go on social media and find, like, a local queer meetup or a queer skating group in your area depending on the area still, but at the time there really weren't like many. So we were having like community rollouts and BIPOC Who Skate was, having like community meetups and rollouts and things where not only would folks get together and skate, but we would sit around and we would talk about like issues. Like we would like not only, like introduce each other and have pronouns and share those and all of that, but like also we would like talk about hard issues. Like I don't know I don't know how we went from sitting around and talking about that sometime to, like, the complete lack of accountability that feels like it exists sometimes now, but it was kind of a cool, like, era of those starting up and figuring out how those would kinda, like, work. So, honestly, like, before the pandemic hit, that's pretty much how it operated, like, community events and the Q&As, like, I was always kind of, like, grumpy about the fact that a lot of the big brands, they, like, have a sponsored skater, sure, but you never know their story or, like, their background or where they come from or whatever, and that makes so much of the community, so, like, sharing people's background and stuff felt really important, and then what I ended up learning was that it just resonated with so many other folks who either felt unheard or they didn't feel like they had the words themselves maybe, and so, yeah, like, I realized how important the Q&As were, and like, I think I know I hit 100 at some point, so I know it's over 100, and I really like, success to me also looks like getting those all archived, honestly, and up somewhere at some point because it's really pretty cool now to go back to some of the first ones, and, like, some of those folks are, like, I don't know, like, Cher Strawberry was one of our first, like, Q&As, like, she's, like, sponsored Thrasher, big deal skater now with, like, a ton of boards and a shoe and stuff, so, like, it's just kinda cool to see how some of that's evolved. But during the beginning of the pandemic, I kinda shut most of it down, like, it didn't feel important at the time. I guess that's not true entirely. We, like, tried to do things that were beneficial for community at the time, sent a whole bunch of helmets, to the Portland protests and things like that, donated to mutual aid groups and stuff, but I think generally speaking, just, like, skating and organizing a skating event and stuff, obviously, was, like, not on anyone's mind, so it really sat for, like, probably a year pretty untouched, and I had a lot of personal grief come up that I had to deal with, and it's kinda like coming back out of the box again, to be honest, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a sense of kind of what's next? What directions you want to go or any kind of hopes for the future, even if there's kind of just directions and maybe not very specific things?
Yeah, keeping up with the Q&As is still really important to me. Right now I'm working on a Listen to Trans Skaters project, which is featuring exclusively Q&As with different trans skaters. For a while, I really started to feel like what I wanted QSA to focus on was just trans skaters. Like I had a time being like, no, it should just be Trans Skate Alliance, TSA. My partner used to joke about redoing the TSA like airport logo for it and stuff. But like I still feel like that's, like one of the most marginalized and misunderstood groups in marginalized queer communities. And a lot of skate spaces still and skate language and basic stuff is just honestly still not geared towards trans skaters. And so starting the Listen to Trans Skaters project is kind of the way that I like revived that being really important to me and I think it is to the community as well. I know it is to a lot of the trans skaters, at least that I've been talking with and sharing stories with, and there's a bunch more of those ahead. So that'll be exciting. And other than that, like I'm excited to get merch and stuff like going again. That's kind of like an artistic fun part of it anyways. And I always get excited to see folks in it. And I think folks kind of find community through that a little bit. Like folks get really excited to go to the park and see someone else in a QSA shirt, and like maybe know that, you don't all have to be best friends, but like maybe that person at least like cares about you or will respect your space and be like a decent, inclusive other skater to be with, just to skate with. So yeah, growing in that way. Also, like as events kind of, come back around a little bit in safe capacities, like you've been doing that. I'm gonna go and judge and sponsor a park competition at Stronger Skate Park this weekend, which is actually also owned by a trans skater, which is really rad. And so
Cool.
I'm interviewing them and supporting that space as often as possible. Yeah. And yeah, who knows? Sky's the limit, but not Vans or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. But it sounds like there are some new, where maybe some doors close, some other doors are kind of opening, and you're making some doors, making some doorways, and continuing to find ways to kind of uplift, especially trans skaters. I agree with you. I'll say as a trans skater, like I feel like I'm either like people are like, ooh, ah, or people like just don't consider my experience like at all or know anything about it. So there's kind of this weird, huge gap of like, it always just feels like an extreme sort of thing to me when people find out that I'm trans, or like when that's a part of the conversation with folks who just like aren't trans.
Can I ask what you mean by ooh ah?
Like, I don't know, like people are like, oh, you're trans. Like, oh, like, just like wanting to know more kind of, or kind of viewing me as like this, like interesting specimen,
Oh,
like, and it's sort of like, I don't know, like,
weird.
I'm just a person.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, yes, I take HRT, and like, yes, there are things I've done to like change my body, but I feel like sometimes people are so like interested in that stuff, or again, like just there's a way that it's kind of like dehumanizing, but it comes across as like intense interest. But it's like,
Mm,
oh, you're not really interested in me, or interested in like this aspect of my identity that's like, fascinating to you, or like curious to you, or whatever, and like that's where it's like people start to want like free labor from you, essentially, around like explain certain things to
oh,
me, or like explain this to me, or like asking really invasive questions. And I think some people think they're coming at it with like a really nice attitude, or people can be really kind in a way, but they're not understanding that like there's a power dynamic at play. And also, like a lot of that stuff is super invasive, or it's like, just a part of my everyday life, and it's
Yeah.
like not, like
and that comes up for y'all in a skate environment too.
oh yeah, everywhere,
Wow.
all environments, period.
Shit.
One thing I hear sometimes on podcasts a lot, honestly, is like one of the first things that trans folks get asked would be like, "Well, how long have you been on hormones?" Or like however
Hmm.
that gets worded, and that's like
Really?
I always think to myself like, "Wow, I am like, man, I hope they like asked about that," or like because even something that I'm aware of when doing like the Listen to Trans Skaters project is like some trans folks do want to share about that, and that's awesome because that will resonate with the trans folks who maybe have those questions or want to hear, or the accomplices who are like interested in reading along and learning and stuff. But like for other folks, like they might just want to talk about like their really sick like grinds this week. Like they might not want to talk about their transition or like some of these things that can be really deeply personal also, like, so that's yeah, that definitely, like, I see that happen a lot. I've definitely heard things, and I try to be aware of it with that project. I probably have, like, a bias because I am a trans skater, or, like, I have an empathy to it, but I don't know, Max, if you would say that it's almost like a fetishization. I can't ever pronounce that word,
It's
but
a
that
hard
is
word.
how it feels at times. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. It's totally a fetishization. And like I've been in positions where I've been tokenized, or I've been like the skater that people are really excited to know because I'm trans. And like it might not even be conscious for them, but I can tell, it's like I can tell that it's not just about sort of who I am as a person. And like granted, who I am, like being trans is a part of who I am, but there's certain ways that that can be sort of highlighted or become the topic of conversation, where it's just sort of like, okay, but do you see all of me?
Mm,
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting dynamic. And I am actually a trans
mhm.
person who generally like I don't mind sharing about that stuff, because for me, I do want to normalize it. I do want to be able to say to a cis person who has no fucking idea about anything, just like, yep, like period. This has been my experience in the world. And like I don't usually like within a certain level of trying to discern for safety, like I'm not gonna overshare with randos, but like with certain people, I will have those conversations sometimes. I really don't mind because to me, it's just like the truth of my life. And I think more people knowing the truth of other people's lives in general, period, and sort of accepting those and understanding that there's a variety of truths that are lived every single day, all the time, constantly. I think that's important. So I sometimes don't mind having those combos. But again, it's like, are you respecting the fullness of my humanity? Or are you doing this from a place where you're kind of putting me under a microscope because I'm fascinating to you, or I'm disgusting to you, or I'm an anomaly to you, or whatever?
Any other
Yeah, any other,
yeah.
yeah, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I was kind of a part of Derby, in those
Yeah.
earlier days where there weren't as many trans skaters. And so it was kind of like, what do we do with this person that uses they, them pronouns? Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, and I think one thing that a lot of folks who maybe aren't like engaged in the world of roller derby in particular, like one thing folks might not realize is, like a lot of the game structure is set up, like when you go to register for a tournament, etc., like you have to sign up like male or female, like there are
Mhm,
things structurally from the moment you walk into gameplay where like you
mhm.
like they literally don't even know where to place you, or like things like that still. So yeah, like there's lots of work to
Yeah.
be done there. And I feel I feel for your experience in roller derby as a trans person early on because it was like worse. And for like the folks who came before us because like just holy hell, like what a awful time. I saw a lot of those people get really hurt and like really discarded and like I still extend my love to some of those people frequently because I just really hate how that went down, and I always try to hold space for those folks still too. Um,
Yeah, 100%. And
but coming
yeah, go
back to
ahead.
Joy, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, 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 no. Go ahead. Go ahead. Bring it back around.
I was just gonna say, like that being said, I do still think some of that at least is still more ingrained in like the derby world and maybe even like the old school derby world. So like with some of the new teams that are popping up, they are like dispelling those ancient like practices and like park skating and stuff is more conducive to originality at least and folks like you don't have to sign up and be like, this is my name, this is my this, like, like which category are you being put in as much with just going to the park. Although I will also say that this is a conversation that's becoming really like popular as skate park competitions come up again, like for all the same reasons as before, right? Like, is it a women's contest or is it a men's contest? And like, or like, can everyone enter? Or does the announcer know the pronouns of the people skating, or are they just winging it? Is this just like a skateboarder who's volunteering who has no idea that there's trans folks skating or things like that? So I think like that evolution is definitely continuing to take place into park and all the other evolutions of skating and stuff.
Yeah, thank you to you both for shedding so much light on your experiences. And what I want to know as a cis skater is what would your call to action be for cis skaters like myself to speak up for their trans peers in skate spaces?
Max, do you want to answer too?
Sure, I can. Do you want me to go first or?
Sure. I'm thinking.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky.
Yeah.
I struggle with like a call to action moment because for me, I'm kind of just like, I need you to do some deep internal work. Like, I don't need you to explicitly be going around yelling at people about getting my pronouns right. Like, it's helpful to correct people, but I would rather people be like talking about gender in therapy or like with their friends or like with the other cis people, like doing your own research around like trans people's experiences. Like, watch a documentary about trans people's experiences, understand that like that's not going to represent everyone's experiences, but there's going to be some good information there. Like, check out the Trans Skaters Project via QSA, like read those stories. Think about your own gender and how it kind of plays into how you navigate the world. Think about how it might be different if you didn't feel so comfortable with it or if people didn't see you how you wanted to be seen. Think about maybe other areas in your life where that's true and understand that, that can be applied to gender in a lot of people's lives. I don't know. To me, I feel like with a lot of this stuff, the direction my mind always goes is like, I just need people to like really think about their own shit and like unpack their own shit because oftentimes it's those unconscious biases that are the things that are like someone, again, very well intentioned, who might even be a friend, comes to me, but is saying really invasive or problematic things, or like not understanding the power dynamic at play, or, coming at it with a certain energy where I'm just sort of like, again, I need you to keep like see me as a full human. And that type of work can really only happen, I think, like both in relationship with accountability, but also when you're willing to like dig a little deeper into your own experiences, really unpack some of your unconscious beliefs, and really get curious about those, get curious about how it just allows you to move through the world when you're cisgender. So I don't know. I don't know. It's a little off the cuff, but that's usually where I go with it.
Yeah. Internal work.
No, that's spot on. I think one thing that I remind cis folks often is that like the same structures that oppress trans folks also oppress cis folks. So if I'm talking with someone like at the booth or something and they're trying to understand like USA and trans skaters and the work or whatever, like sometimes we talk about like, I don't know, like I've talked with people about how their husbands are expected to be, really strong and masculine. And that's like a misnomer because actually they have a lot of feelings and some of these like kinds of things to get them to start thinking about the ways that gender is constructed, like you were saying, Max, like in their own head and how it like affects them or harms them. And then I kind of tend to find that typically, at least with the folks who are kind of engaged in caring, that they start to see the connect between how it's similar or how at least that connection like occurs with trans skaters. I guess like on a real simple level though, like I would love to see folks still really start to dispel things that still cling to highly feminine language that like oppress people, but that like won't just change the name of something. And some things have changed names, and that's great. And I think that everyone should look to those because clearly, like it can be done. But I think that like any derby league that's still clinging to like dolls, dames. God, I don't even know. I can't even think of all the other like weird ones. But like I think that needs to go. Like I think there's really simple things that we need to like, maybe we can have some good memories about those things, and that's fine, and we, like, put those shirts away in a trunk now, and we don't use that anymore, and we move on, and we call it something different, and, like, it just is what it is. Like, some of those things, like, personally, I'm a little eye rolly being like, "Okay, well, that's still called that," or whatever, like, we could do better, so that is another one that comes to mind, but it's much deeper overall, like, just memorizing pronouns and stuff is not it. And a theme that I see a lot with the trans skaters that I'm interviewing, the younger ones keep mentioning that they're really tired of people just memorizing their pronouns, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that maybe the shift has been to ask pronouns now, and that's good. So for a lot of those younger skaters, they're like, cool, yeah, we do that. But then but like then what? Like that's like bare minimum, like
Mm-hmm.
so it's been kind of interesting to hear that from some of the junior skaters and the younger skaters too.
Yeah, that especially really hit me, like the whole like just memorizing pronouns thing. Because again, it's like there are so many people that like will memorize pronouns and then get like everything else wrong, or just say like the most problematic things. But then there's like this like culture where it's like, well, I got your pronouns right. Like at least I'm trying. I don't know. Like, yeah, it's wild. I'm glad some people are talking about that and like being up about it.
I think you're spot on. And I think, like, I don't know where everything's going to evolve next, but I think that, like, I do think that, kids are getting better at, like, the pronoun thing. And at this point, a lot of them, like, already know and they talk about it in school and everything else. So, yeah, I think that's, like, bare minimum. And especially when someone knows their pronoun, but then they still have to select male or female to play a tournament and certain things. Like, these kids are like, this is ridiculous, So I'm here for the kids, like, always. You listen to them. Like, they're just gonna keep evolving.
Yeah. And I'd imagine that you found a lot of common ground with other trans skaters through the Listen to Trans Skaters project. But did you learn anything that surprised you from anyone or any patterns that you recognized?
Yeah. Like, I learned something from all of them, to be honest, which is, like, my favorite part, and it's really healing, like, also as a trans skater to get to, like, engage in that. So I've honestly really, like, learned something cool or, like, something from everyone so far. I would say, like, as far as patterns go, like, yeah, the younger skaters kind of being over just the pronoun memorization is one. Another interesting thing is that a lot of like I'd say that like that skating boom or whatever that like is reflected. There's a lot of folks who are kind of like they're like a pandemic skater and they'll say things like, I'm a pandemic skater like most of us. And I just think that's interesting because 2 years ago, like that wouldn't have been the page. Like most of the people would have been like roller derby people who had been playing for a few years already or something. So it's been cool to see that shift. And I definitely think that that speaks to how many new skaters are really out there. And it is really like, thriving and growing and stuff. And that's cool. The other common theme is just honestly, unfortunately, is underrepresentation. Like, I still try to talk to a lot of trans skaters from different backgrounds. So, what I hear, depending on their additional like background, is that like fat trans skaters are still underrepresented and black trans skaters are still underrepresented. And in some cases, like retired trans skaters are underrepresented, or youth trans skaters, or indigenous trans skaters, or indigenous two spirit skaters. Like that, the representation is just still missing within those like additionally marginalized layers or those intersections or whatever we want to call that, which is unfortunate to see. What I think like we all kind of know, because like we all kind of know there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So
Yeah. So I'm going to suggest a big shift next, where or we're going to kind of talk about other non-skating and non-activism aspects of your life. So I noticed that you're a creature of habit with all of your activities, including skating, but biking, and you've got drumming rituals. How have these rituals helped you to maintain your mental and physical health?
I'm learning. I'm like very much in the midst of trying to be honest. What I've found out so far is that if I have absolutely no structure, no ritual at all, I don't like do very well. I don't like get stuff done. I like my ADHD kind of like takes me all over the place probably a little. So it helps me to have like light structure, like I prioritize movement every day, or I'm trying to. I find that when I prioritize movement at least once a day, that like it's better for my mood and I just feel better and that kind of thing. So sometimes that looks like going for a walk with the dog because it's just really hard to get out that day. And other times that looks like a 10-mile bike ride, or other times it's the skate park or whatever. And there's certain things like just core things that I've found really help. So I journal like daily, or I try really hard to. I try to like move daily. Yeah, music is a nice release, but I guess because it's drumming, I kind of still consider that like movement. But yeah, just other aspects of joy. Obviously.
You've talked about wanting to see more of a connection between queer musicians and queer skaters, all of the punk scene and skateboarding. Have you made any moves towards making that a reality in your own musical pursuits?
No, but I'm excited to say that like I really hope that's part of what's on the horizon, or part of success, like you were asking about earlier. Like my personal connection with skating and music is just like, to me, they're like very entwined. And so I would like personally love to see like, I've always said I want to see like small Warp Tour with really like mindful punk and hardcore bands, but then like people quad
Yes.
skating in the background. Like how there used to be ramps at Warp Tour in the early days and stuff. So like I really hope that what we're doing, like because I do have like I'm pretty much putting all of my efforts and energies into Queer Skate Alliance and Radical at this point. I've dabbled in a lot of other skating projects and other brands, and at this point, I'm really just ready to like pour into my own and to see where that gets me instead. And so, yeah, I hope like hell it's something like that because that would be so cool. Because honestly, that's kind of like what got me into skating, or like I don't know, what made skating cool for me again was kind of getting into skateboarding even, and like not being very good at it, but loving a lot of that culture. And I had a lot of ideas for that also before like the pandemic hit that like, are probably things that can just maybe now start to be back on the table, because anything with a concert or an event, was just like not feasible, and concerts are still hard or whatever. But To be continued.
Yeah, I'll have to stay tuned to your ideas. If you need any boots on the ground, I would definitely volunteer my time towards that. That sounds awesome.
100. Let's go.
Oh, so just one more music slash roller skating sort of question. This one is, a little more of a sad question, but also an important and empowering question in a lot of ways. So I know for me personally, roller skating has been instrumental in processing grief after losing my dad. Died just before the pandemic started pretty much. And I noticed and I related to it. Well, I related to it a lot when you talk about processing grief through songwriting and collaborating with your bandmates. Can you talk a little bit about how your outlets have helped you with processing the grief of losing your Nana Jean?
Yeah, sure. I'm so sorry to hear, that you also had that loss because I know
Yeah.
how hard it can be. And it really, like, especially happening, folks who lost folks like before, during, or right after the pandemic, like, have kind of a different experience, in my opinion, just because things were so different than a lot of us knew and expected, and things changed a lot. So I really like feel for you and extend a lot of like love that you also had to go through that. I was really thankful to have my outlets to heal through that grief. Although I think I tried really hard to turn away from all of them at the
Yeah.
time. They all like brought it. Songwriting at the time, like, was very helpful. And I had really put music away to start playing roller derby. Like, when I was living in Chicago and I was working at the bike shop, I was always playing in bands, and we would book shows, and that was a huge part of my life. And in high school it was too. And then when I started playing roller derby and that was competitive and I was gonna train and all these things, like, I really put music up on the shelves. So even like buying a drum set and sitting down and being like, this is a thing I'm gonna do again, was like healing and hard and very important to that process. With Radical, when we were able to finally launch after we waited a year to get wheels, about the time we knew we were going to be able to finally be like, hey, we're here, we have wheels, like, everything's a go, like, website's open. It was actually really close to Nana Jean's birthday. And so Neon knew how important that was to me. And so we were able to like officially relaunch Radical Wheels on Nana Jean's birthday, which like
Oh,
just means the world to me. And is something that brings me joy, every year now, kind of, because I always think of her, always in general, but definitely on her birthday. And she would have been so proud to know that I like ran a wheel company and did all of that. And she would just be so stoked, or she is stoked, however that works. No.
yeah.
So that's one way that I was kind of able to claim that through that process. And Neon was like so, so supportive through all of that. I can't thank her enough for kind of allowing that too. But yeah, like, I don't know, parts of that, as you can probably relate, are probably still real. Grief is like waves or whatever, like they say. I mean, it's cliche, but it's true. So sometimes I think like my grief is in the past now and I'm all good. And then I'm like crying about something I didn't know was going to trigger it. So I'm happy to have joy, like we've talked about, if anything, because it helps, helps work through those other really hard moments and stuff too, where, you know, it's not all grief all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely spot on, and thanks for opening yourself up with that with us. I know how personal that is.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's cool. Like, it's cool to be able to share that, so I'm glad to get that. And it's definitely been a way to kind of like make it not such a sad memory, which is exactly at least what I know Nana Jean would have wanted, because she always was one of those people who was like, don't sit around and cry and, like all those things. So she's very happy that it's a party every year instead, or like that there's a thing to celebrate and that everyone doesn't like sit around and mope. So that's
Yeah,
perfectly in her honor.
I love that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It's really a really beautiful way to honor her and your relationship with her.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, so this has been a really cool conversation with you, Olive. I learned a lot about what goes on behind the scenes with all of your work from Radical Wheels to QSA. And I just want you to know that it's been a really empowering and enlightening conversation. And I just think you're really cool.
I appreciate y'all tons. So thanks to y'all. And I'm excited to hear this when it's done, and I'm excited to see what else y'all do with the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, we love when people feel seen and heard. We're about it. So
Yeah.
hope that we could provide a little bit of that today. And again, thanks so much for sharing some about you and your story. I think it's really important that we document people's truths and lives, especially, marginalized folks, as we talked about earlier. So looking forward to seeing you out in the IRL world or over online in the coming days and weeks and years, and really rooting for you from Brooklyn. For sure.
Yeah. And I want to meet you in real life, and I can't wait until Queer Skate Fest and all the sick bands that are going to play.
Yeah. I hope the next y'all are interviewing me or whatever, like podcasting. I hope we're in like a tent at a small queer skate music festival,
Hell
and
yeah.
everyone's like super stoked on your podcast. And yep, that's the dream. Then you can
Yeah.
like talk up those bands and all community.
I like your vision for the future.
Let's go.
All right, Olive, we'll talk to you later.
Cool, sounds good. Have a good rest of y'all's night. Thanks for chatting.
Okay.
Thanks, pal.
Bye, friend.
Yeah. Bye.